Good afternoon and welcome to our third free GAMSAT webinar of the series. It's a very special day. Today is the first day for the release of GAMSAT Medical School offers for 2023. Congratulations to those who received an offer. I guess all your hard work has paid off. To those who haven't received an offer, you might just want to wait a bit because you might get second and third round offers over the next couple of months. However, if you don't end up getting an offer this year, please don't feel discouraged. Don't give up, because if you give up, your hard work is just going to, you put all this effort in just to give up. So just keep going. It's okay to feel sad. But if you want to be a doctor, if that's your dream, or a dentist or optometrist, you just keep going at it. And if you do need support, I guess you can always talk to your friends, family, or you can contact us and we can point you in the right direction for other avenues into medicine and how to approach medicine for 2024 entry. In saying that, I know a lot of you would probably haven't even gotten to that stage yet. You're probably just sitting the GAMSAT for the first time. GAMSAT, or if you have sat it recently in September, the GAMSAT results do get released, I think, mid-November is what ACE is saying. And a few of you have just never sat GAMSAT, which is why you're probably watching this this webinar today. Today's webinar is going to be a lot more streamlined. It's kind of better for a virtual experience, so you can play along at home. I know a lot of you have university exams coming up or this week. So a lot of people are busy this time around as well. Spooky season, Halloween's coming up in the next couple of days. So it's a very busy, stressful time of the year, but it's also a very fun time of the year. So it's something to it's something to look forward to, I guess. It's heating up here. It's very, very hot here in the Gold Coast. But hopefully wherever you are around Australia or around the world, you're getting excited for either the beginning of summer or the beginning of winter. So we have recorded a few other webinars. So webinar 1 and 2, you can access those through our website or through YouTube. If you just look up Institute of Medical Education on YouTube, you can access our previous webinars. Go check them out. They're packed with a lot of information. And generally the way we go through these webinars, as we have in the past, is that we go through a section 1 question or stimuli, and then we go through a section 3 stimuli. And the whole purpose of these webinars isn't to give you the hardest GAMSAT question in the world or to make us look smart. It's supposed to be standardized in a way that anybody can attempt them, no matter what level of your study. So hopefully you get an idea of what sort of questions you should be able to see in the exam. Again, the purpose of these webinars isn't just to show you how smart we are. It's to give you ideas of topics you may have missed in your study and topics you might want to brush up on and little things you might want to brush up on. And I picked a couple of topics today that I've noticed in the past from teaching. So I've taught quite a number of years now at the University of Sydney and at tertiary level. And I've noticed a lot of students get taught on face value how to approach certain questions without actually understanding the mathematics or understanding the principles behind what they're learning. That's what we're going to go through today. And hopefully you get a lot out of it. Cool. So before we move forward, again, please just follow us on social media. If you want to get access to all our free material, follow us on our website or Facebook, YouTube, or LinkedIn, as well as Instagram and TikTok, where we post a ton of free material related to GAMSAT, medicine, interview offers, and entry. And if you want to keep up to date and keep in the loop with what's going on in the world of medicine, please give us a follow, give us a like, and join the journey with us. So today's session, we're going to take a look at, firstly, a section 1 image analysis question. It's actually a very, I purposely picked this image because when I saw it, I was like, oh, this is so beautiful. We should definitely do a class on this. I'll go through it in a second. And also, we're going to look at a biochemical equilibrium stimuli and stimulus question. I'd say it probably is a common, I wouldn't say it's a common question, but it's a common theme you see in the GAMSAT in terms of the mathematical side of chemistry. Equilibrium is a big one because it can entail acid-base chemistry, it can entail kinetics, energy distribution, all these sorts of things in terms of equilibrium. It's a big topic, especially in the GAMSAT. So it's something we want to go through, but specifically dissociation constants, association constants, which we'll go through at the later half of this webinar. And if you do have any questions, because today's webinar is more streamlined, it's more for a virtual experience. You can play along at home. If you do have any questions, you can post them in the comment section below wherever this video is posted, or you can contact us directly, have a chat with us and discuss how to move forward based on what you've learned today. So first topic we're going to look at is image analysis. So I've picked here, this is one of my favorite, I guess, paintings, portraits, whatever you want to call it, by Picasso. So it is called Acrobat and Young Harlequin. It was painted in 1905. So it was during a time where Picasso was living in Paris. So these guys, so the traveling circus performers, they're called, pardon my French, I hope I can say this correctly, saltimbanque is how it's pronounced in French. So they're traveling circus performers. They're a common spectacle in Paris, and they perform in the public squares of neighborhoods where Picasso lived for a few years. I mean, it's a shame you don't get to see this anymore these days, but these were very, very common over only 100 years ago, only a century ago. And you can see here the performers, they're probably big brother, little brother, and they're looking out at the audience as if the show had just ended. So in the GAMSAT, in section 1, it's common to get presented with an image and to try to analyze the image based on its context and what it's telling us. So just keep in mind when you're looking at these sorts of subjective images, there's always 3 things I try to think about. It's what is the meaning of this, say, painting? What was the context it was, I guess, developed in? And what does the audience perceive of this? So there's always the painter, what they perceive and what the audience perceives. There's 2 different things, and the context it was designed in. So consider these factors when you're looking at these sorts of imagery type questions in section 1 of your GAMSAT. So what we can do, I think I've designed 3 questions here. Because in the GAMSAT, you're given, 100 minutes for 62 questions. It averages to about a minute 35, minute 40 per question. So if we've got 3 questions here, try to give yourself 4 minutes 30, let's say about 5 minutes to answer these 3 questions. So what I'll do is I'll show you the question, and then you can pause the screen, answer them, deliberate, and then unpause the screen, and then I can, obviously, go through the answer. So how about we do that? So we've got the first 2 questions here. The first one says, the overriding theme of this image is either A, B, C, or D. That's power, friendship, melancholy, or hope. And question 2 says the artificial backdrop serves to A, contrast the vibrant colors of the performers, B, create a sense of dislocation in space, C, make obvious that the 2 boys depicted in the image are performers, and D, show the unity between the performers through similar colored flowers. And the final question is 3, saltimbanque, were a favorite theme of Picasso's. At the time of its creation, Acrobatic and Young Harlequin suggests Picasso was trying to mend a broken relationship. He fell in love with Parisian lifestyle. He had an overbearing negative influence in his life, or he felt like an estranged bohemian outcast. So what you can do is you can pause the screen here and pause the screen here. So give yourself about 1:35 per question. And what I'll do is I'll give you the answer in about 5 seconds. So if I was you, pause the screen now, or else I'm just going to go in the answer in about 5 seconds. So pause now. Okay, so the answers. For question 1, the answer, so the overriding theme of this image. Let's take a look at this image first. If you can actually analyze the image, it helps you answer all the subsequent questions. If we take a look at the image here, the first thing you should note is performers. Performers are supposed to be, have a smiley face, happy face, jumping up, doing death-defying acts, especially these if you want to call these circus performers, trying to look for the politically correct term there. But if you take a look at these performers, notice how Picasso decided to paint them in a still motion. Why would Picasso paint circus performers in a still motion? That's like the complete opposite of what a circus performer does. So just take that straight away when you look at this image. Look at their facial expressions. Notice how their facial expressions are very mute. They're very devoid of emotion. Notice how the big brother here, his shoulders are drooped forward. I mean, that doesn't scream confidence to me. If your shoulders are drooped forward, it means you're just like, it's like you're shrugging your shoulders, I'm over this. Notice how, again, I guess the hat is tilted down. You can see though that the big brother has his arm over his little brother, kind of to show this power balance that he's trying to comfort him, that his big brother is watching over him. And you can see a kind of hint of confidence from the little boy, hand on the hip, like, look, I just done my show. Just looking into the crowd, kind of mute faces again. It's kind of like, this is my life. But he's got his hand over like a little teapot. He's been shown how to do this. He's been conditioned to, I guess, perform like this in front of a crowd. But again, he's a child. Notice how he's got no emotion. It's just blank. It's mute. So if you also take a look at the backdrop. So if you look at the backdrop, notice how the backdrop is. I mean, back in the days, yes, these are the backdrops they would have used, but just notice how it kind of complements the devoid of emotion brothers here, where it just kind of adds to this this sense of dislocation, if you will. So if we take a look at the first question, it says the overriding theme of this image. Based on what we just described there, probably the most accurate answer, I mean, they all could be correct, but based on the context here, the most accurate answer is C, melancholy. So let's get my pen out here. So melancholy is the most accurate answer because you can see that, again, rather than capturing the actors in the middle of a dramatic scene, Picasso's kind of captured them at the end of the show. So they're looking in different directions, like they're, I guess, receiving applause from the audience, but they look just very devoid of life or emotion, if you want to put it that way. So they've got sad expressions, drooping shoulders. They've got their downturned mouths, which I've written down here. Again, so which I missed actually. Their costumes are very frivolous. They're very outgoing, and look at how their facial expressions contrast their very outgoing costumes. So that's another hint that it's not some sort of fun time. So melancholy, because you can see that throughout the whole image, there's a lot of tropes there showing you that they're just not happy. So melancholy is just sadness, I guess. Let's just go through the other options and see why they're incorrect. Because look, in the GAMSAT, it's easier to identify the incorrect answers because you have a 75% chance of choosing the incorrect answer, whereas you have a 25% chance of choosing the correct answer. So let's take a look from A all the way down to D. So power. So look, there is a theme of power in this image. However, the question is asking for overriding theme. The power here is obviously the power dynamic between the older brother and the little brother. However, you can argue that it's a brother and it's a brother sibling power dynamic. It's not as strong as I guess it's harder to explain a power dynamic between siblings in this instance, because you can see that they look like they both have, in this instance, the same amount of power. Even though he's holding his hand across his brother's shoulder, it's kind of more saying, I'm here to comfort you, rather than I'm your boss. So in this in this instance of sibling power, this dynamic, it's not showing that the brother is controlling the little boy, his little brother. It's just showing that they're comforting each other. That's why I guess you can cross off power. Friendship, I wouldn't say so, again, because yes, you can have friendships with your siblings, but it's not an overriding theme here. Yes, they're in this together. They're in this, I guess, emotionless space together, but they're not, it's not the reason why Picasso would have drawn this painting. So consider that. Friendship isn't the overriding theme, it's the sadness. You can see from the droopy face, the contrast in the costumes, the very awkwardly placed backdrop, the fact that they're not performing their what they're supposed to be doing, they're not doing their show. So that's why you can kind of say, yes, friendship is involved, but it's not the overriding theme. Hope, you could argue hope, but again, if he was arguing hope, he'd have something in here to kind of provide that hope. There really isn't. It's just very mute, sad faces, very bad posture, body language, a contrast of the costumes with their I guess their physical appearance, this backdrop which kind of makes it seem like they're going through time and not experiencing emotions or feelings. So if there was hope, I would probably see maybe if they threw something on the ground like a rose or some sort of token or trope that represents hope, or like a beacon of light. Maybe if there was a tear in the backdrop here with sunlight shining through. But because there's none of that, it kind of leads us to believe that yes, they're hopeful, but it's not the main theme. Melancholy based on those facts is the main theme. Now, this is my take on the, I guess this is my take on the painting. I love this painting. I wish I could have this painting up in my home. You've got this one over here, but this one, I think it's in America somewhere in a museum. I think it was Pennsylvania. This painting would be worth a lot of money, probably millions, but I wish I had it in my house. It would be a nice conversation starter. But yeah, so that's why the answer for 1 is melancholy. Now we kind of answer question 2 just by analyzing the actual painting. But if we take a look here, it says the artificial backdrop serves to, well, let's take a look from each option. Well, the answer is B. But let's see why the answer is B and not the others. So let's take a look first for part A. To contrast the vibrant colors of the performers. Not really, and that's because contrast means to show the opposite or to contrast between two things. You can see here though that you've got colors here. So it's not actually contrasting, it's kind of adding. So it's kind of adding to the performance. So it's adding to the image. So you've got the colors here that adds to the colors here with the performers. So they kind of match. So it's not contrasting the colors of the performers. If it's anything, it's contributing, not contrasting. So that's why A is incorrect. So we'll get back to B in a second. C says make obvious that the 2 boys depicted in the image are performers. That's a very obvious answer. However, you have to understand the context that this painting was painted in, or when it was painted. So it was painted in 1905. Back then, especially in Paris, these backdrops, these performances were so commonplace that you'd have to draw it here. It's not to make obvious that these guys are performers. People back in that time when it was developed or painted by Picasso would understand that this is a performance show. So it's not there to make obvious anything. It's just part of the show. So it's like today, if you were drawing a picture of a park, you'd always draw a picture of a park with, say, trees or grass and maybe kids running around. Maybe in 200 years' time, I'm getting a bit morbid here, global warming takes over, parks don't exist. So people will be like, oh, look at that. From 200 years ago, a painting, people in the year 2400, they were like, wow, they used to have grass and trees at this park. The same principle here. For us, it's trivial, but for people in the future, you might think, oh, he's trying to say something. Not really. It's there because that's how it was back then. So that's why C is incorrect, based on context. Now, D says, show unity between the performers through similar colored flowers. Again, so you can say that this is kind of the opposite of A. Yes, there is similar colored flowers between the performers and the flowers. So is it to show unity between the performers? Now, you could argue the answer is either B or D. It's a 50-50. A lot of section 1 questions are 50-50. It comes down to if you have the inside knowledge of what the painter was thinking, or if what the examiner, the question they designed, what they're thinking. Now, in these types of questions, it's a 50-50, but there's one more correct than the other. The reason why D is incorrect is because B is correct. I know that sounds weird, but you have to understand that the whole theme of this painting is melancholy. The whole theme is sadness. So the idea is that if the theme of the artwork is sadness, then you'd know that the backdrop is serving a purpose, and that purpose is to promote the sadness. That's based on that rationale. That's why B is correct. Now, if you were to look at this in isolation without the idea of melancholy or sadness, you could argue that D is correct. However, based on what we've presented here and based on the evidence presented, it's more likely B is correct. That is, it creates a sense of dislocation in space. It kind of adds to that feeling of just being disassociated or disconnected with your surroundings and your reality. I mean, yes, it kind of does show unity, but again, it's kind of, for me, it just adds color. It just makes it look fake. It makes it all look like, if you think about it, look how massive it is. Look how massive it is compared to their heads. It just doesn't look real. So it's just purposely done or drawn in a way that's just so absurd that it kind of points in the other direction, which is it creates a dislocation in space. Now, this is why a lot of section 1 questions in the GAMSAT throw people off. This is why section 1, it's so hard to prepare for section 1, because a lot of the times it comes down to the 50-50, and it comes down to what the painter thought. Remember what I said at the beginning, it's what the artist thinks, what the audience thinks, and based on context, and what the examiner thinks here. So I think with section 1, the best tip I can give you for studying section 1 is try to narrow it down to 50-50. So there's always going to be 2 options which are the most correct. If you can do that, it gives you a better chance of scoring well. Even though it is notoriously difficult to prepare for section 1, at least try to narrow it down from 4 options to 2 options. You can do that very easily, because a lot of times you can narrow it down. It gives you a 50-50, and it gives you the best chance of scoring well. So if we take a look at option 3, it says Saltimbanque. Sorry, my French, I've completely butchered this. They were a favorite theme of Picasso's. At the time of its creation, Acrobat and Young Harlequin suggest Picasso. Well, based on what we've just discussed, the fact that it's this melancholy, the scene is still It kind of shows the vagabond, I guess, performers, those who don't have a home, that have sad expressions, all these sorts of ideas. If you, I guess, knock off, again, the incorrect answers, you can see why the answer is going to be, well, actually, we knock it off, you'll see why, which is the answer. So it says A, was trying to mend a broken relationship. We'll leave that in the maybe pile. Fell in love with the Parisian lifestyle? Absolutely not. If you fell in love with the Parisian lifestyle, the performers would be absolutely jumping around, going crazy. Had an overbearing negative influence in his life? Could be. And C, felt like an estranged bohemian outcast. Now, the answer clearly is D, just based on the fact that you can see that these guys are clearly outcasts. They have that whole bohemian vibe. When you think of bohemian, it's just different. It's out there. It kind of, I mean, if you think of bohemian, it's kind of dressing up in different colors. It's trying to be different, trying to be unique, trying to be abstract. And you can see how these guys just feel like they're estranged in. They're in a very weird reality. And they kind of feel as though they're just traveling through time, doing their thing. But this painting's amazing because it quite beautifully conveys, I wouldn't say some form of depression. I wouldn't say depression, but it conveys this idea of life. You know how we just have this basal level of meh, nothing's happening. We're not happy, we're not sad, we're just like meh. So it's this idea you just don't feel like you belong. So that's why D is most correct. When we say, if we take a look at the other options, A was trying to mend a broken relationship. I mean, you could argue that, but at the same time, based on what we've been shown here, and based on the context of where this was drawn in Paris, when Picasso was spending, I think, 5 or 6 years in Paris, you can see based on the context that he might have been trying to mend a broken relationship, but it's more likely that he felt estranged. Based on all of these, again, little tropes, it all comes down to context, how you analyze it. In isolation, you can argue he's probably trying to mend a broken relationship, but if you look at the context, you look at all the little symbols here, you can see it's definitely going to be D. So if it was trying to mend a broken relationship, I don't think so. It looks like technically as well, the big brother and little brother look like they're together anyway. They had a good relationship. If anything, they're just looking at the audience, and maybe it's a relationship between the audience rather than themselves. So that's probably why A is incorrect as well. So it looks like the brothers have a good relationship anyway. They're both just traveling through a bad reality at this point. And C says an overbearing negative influence in his life. I don't think so. If anything, this is an overbearing positive influence to have a big brother look after you. So that's why D is correct. Look, you're probably going to be sitting there scratching your head if you didn't get all the answers correct. And just thinking, oh my God, how the hell am I going to improve my section 1 if it comes down to just subjective answers? Again, with section 1, it is notoriously difficult to prepare for. However, the best preparation advice I can give you is look at the context of the image. Try to read as much as you can. If they do provide you with, say, an introductory passage or some sort of figure legend or image legend or something, take that into account. Don't just skip it, because the context provided to you gives you all the information you need to make up your mind. Because you may be presented with a piece of paper from the 1400s in Scotland and someone wrote a poem. You've got to understand the political climate of that period. They might give you some information in the text, but try to understand these sorts of contexts because they influence the person who developed these images. Try to think in the headspace of the person who presented the image in that context. If you can do that, and then the next best advice is narrow every single option down to 2. So if you give yourself a 50-50 chance, it's the best chance you have at improving your score. because at present you only have a 25% chance of getting a correct answer, 75% chance of getting an incorrect answer. So again, you might want to start looking for the incorrect answers, because that might actually improve your score for section 1. Because if you can knock off the incorrect answers, you're left with the correct answer, it gives you a better chance. So just think about that. So that was a nice way to open up the session. Now on to biochemical equilibrium. Now I specifically chose this topic because I've noticed in the past that a lot of students get confused with all of these acronyms, abbreviations. You know, we see equilibrium everywhere in different contexts. We see dissociation, association constant, we see rate laws, we see them everywhere, but you can just drown in a sea of all these terms. So what I did today was I introduced this topic. We're mainly going to focus on the dissociation constant. I mean, technically, if there's a dissociation constant, it means that the opposite is the association constant. So the good thing is you're going to be learning about both. All you're going to do is just flip them. Because in equilibrium, remember, there's a forward and reverse reaction. Keep that in mind. So if we take a look here at this information, it says that the dissociation constant is used to describe the affinity between a ligand L and a protein P. So the information of a ligand protein, that's LP, equilibrium complex, can be represented as L plus P, and this little symbol here is just the equilibrium symbol. So that means it can go in a forward or reverse reaction, LP. So that's the ligand protein complex. So ligands with higher, more favorable free energy of association, they bind tighter and therefore have greater preference for the bound state. So the dissociation constant describes, so keep this in mind, half the ligand binding sites on the protein that are occupied in the system. Equilibrium is reached when ligand binding and dissociation occur at equal rates. So don't worry if you don't understand what any of this means. We'll go through it after we go through some questions. So the equation you need to keep in mind here is that the dissociation constant equals the concentration of ligand times concentration of protein divided by the ligand protein complex concentration. That also equals, now this is where it gets confusing, the dissociation rate constant divided by the association rate constant. So you've got dissociation constant and you've got dissociation rate constant. So the little k is rate, the big K is just the equilibrium constant. So keep that in mind because it gets confusing. So we've got here, I think I've developed, how many questions do we have? Two, we've got 4 actually, but what I'll do is I'll give you the option to, so in section 3, you get afforded 2 minutes per question. So if you like, you can give yourself 2, 4, 6, 8 to answer all these questions. So what I'll do is I'll give you, you can pause the screen here. And you can pause the screen here. So you can give yourself about 2, 4, 6, 8 minutes. I mean, you can, if you wanted to, pause your screen here and read that if you like as well, just to give you an idea of how to answer these next 4 questions. So what I'll do is I'll give you a chance to answer these questions. So we've got here, before we dive in, an oxygen hemoglobin, or not necessarily hemoglobin actually, an oxygen binding protein curve. It could be hemoglobin, could be something else. But we've got 2 different proteins, so A and B. We've got the curve, you're probably familiar with the oxygen hemoglobin saturation curve. That gives you the sigmoidal S curve. But we've got it here specifically with A and B as the proteins. So what I'll do is I'll give you the 8 minutes starting now. If you want the answers, I'm going to go through the answers in the next, say, 5 seconds. Okay, now oxygen hemoglobin, well, look, so I'm going to go through the answers, but in this instance, the reason why I keep saying oxygen hemoglobin is because A and B represents hemoglobin and myoglobin. It's not part of the question, but it's important. I included these graphs here just to show you, because a lot of students in the past, they get really confused of how to analyze when the graph, let's say, shifts to the left or to the right, what that means, why it means that. So I'm going to show you through these questions why, when you shift the curve to this side, something happens, and why it means you're going to have less or more oxygen bound or not. By using the dissociation equilibrium constant, if you will. So the first question says the percentage saturation, A, can be estimated using which equation? Now this one, the reason why I included this question is because a lot of students might look at this and say, oh my God, what the hell? I don't know what to do. It's a mathematical equation. It's difficult. I don't know what to do. But it's actually, if you just use the graph, it's actually pretty straightforward. And the whole point of this question is just to show you that you can inference all these sorts of mathematical models or mathematical formulae just by looking at the graph here. So it says for curve A, the reason why we're looking at curve A and not curve B is because curve B, so curve A only has one binding site. You can see that quite nicely here because you can see it's a nice linear line going up this way. Whereas curve B has multiple binding sites, and if you've probably recognized, curve B is hemoglobin because it's got 4 binding sites, whereas curve A has 1 binding site. It tells you here actually. So curve A has 1 binding site, curve B has 4 binding sites. Technically, the reason why I said for curve A, the equation, you can't use one of these equations for curve B. Curve B, because it's got 4 binding sites, it has a different kind of equation. It's called the, I think it's called the, I've written it down here. What do they call it? It's called the partial saturation. Rather than the complete saturation, it's partial saturation, and it requires a different calculation. If you'd like, you can go on Google, look up partial saturation calculation of association dissociation constant for, let's say, hemoglobin, and it'll give you a spiel for that. But that's out of the scope for what we're doing right now for this GAMSAT question. This question is asking us the percentage saturation of curve A. So first and foremost, just note that curve A, it's a linear line going upwards. Linear lines, remember the equation y equals mx plus b. So you can keep that in mind. Note that y is the y-axis, x is here, m is the gradient of this line, and b is the x-intercept. Oh, sorry, b is the y-intercept. So you can see here b is 0, so therefore the equation is just y equals mx. But there's actually an easier way. I mean, you could just say y equals mx and then just solve for the gradient. You can, if you wanted to, just pick 2 random ones. You can pick, say, 60. So let's say, you can remember gradient is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So that's m equals. So you can just pick 2. You can pick 60 and 0. And let's say, pick 60 and 0. How about we pick 50 and 0? Let's pick 50 and 0, 5 and 0. So that's 50 minus 0, 5 minus 0. You can see that the gradient is going to equal 50 divided by 10 is 5. So m equals 5. So therefore, our equation is going to equal y equals 5x. So let's keep that in mind. Double check my math here. I went a different way, but let's just go through now our other option, which is if we just take a look at the graph, let's just substitute values here. Remember that the KD, which we got told, KD is half the ligand binding site on the protein that's occupied in the system. So if it's half, so half that's occupied, so let's say it's 50%. So half corresponds with about, so that's 20, I'd say that's 20, that's 10, it's 5, about 5. So we know therefore that the ligand concentration equals 5, so millimeter mercury. Our KD, remember our KD at 50 is 5. So remember KD is the half, so it describes half the ligand binding sites on the protein that are occupied in the system. So you just got to make sure you see that at 50, it corresponds to 5. So that's 5. So if we say, therefore, then if KD is 5, let's pick a random concentration here. Let's pick 5. So what we've got, therefore, is, so we put 5. So let's put it into here. So remember, it has to equal, so actually this is going to get confusing. Sorry, let me just start this again. So for KD is 50%. So we know that 50% equals L over KD plus L. So the answer is A, by the way, but I'll show you why. So if you just substitute the values, so it has to equal 0.5. So KD equals 5. If we pick a ligand concentration over here, so it's going to be 5. So when we have 5 milligrams mercury of O2 partial pressure, yep. You can see, therefore, that it's going to be, get my eraser out here, actually. I'm making this too confusing for what it should actually be. 5 over 5 plus 5. So then you've got 5 over 10 equals 0.5. So there you go. So yep, that's half. So that's why A is correct. You just have to substitute the values. So you just got to substitute. If we did B, we did 2L. So L is going to be 5. So 2, so that's going to be 2 by 5. So remember, it has to equal 50%. It has to equal 0.5. So it's got to equal 0.5. So that's going to be 5 plus 5. So that's 10 over 10. That equals 1. So that's 100%. That's not true. So 100%, actually. So we have to find which one corresponds with the 5 here. That's wrong. Same thing. If you do the same thing here and here, you'll see that it doesn't equal 0.5. We have to make sure that our answer equals 0.5. Because the KD is at 50%. So 50%, sorry. So it's the half the ligand binding sites on the protein that are occupied in the system. So you just have to keep that in mind. So it has to equal 0.5. So if we do here, the percentage saturation, if we do, I mean, I picked 0.5. You could have picked any that's on this linear line. But I picked 0.5 for ease. So it's like the equation here. So 0.5 equals, in this instance, 5x. I think I must have done this incorrectly. If it says 5x here, let's see. Let's do this again. Because m, so it's going to be 50 y2 minus y1 over well, let's just scrap this for a second. So just keep in mind, it has to equal, so 0.5 this equation has to equal 0.5 because we chose 0.5 as the Y value. Making this way too confusing. So if we pick 0.6, I mean, we'd have to obviously find that 0.6 would probably be 8. It would probably be the value here for L would be 8 or something, but it's the same principle. So with these sorts of questions, just use the graph. So just keep in mind that in the GAMSAT, they're more likely going to give you a question like this where you could just go off into with the fairies like I just did and came to a weird conclusion here. But I'm pretty sure, look, I did the math wrong here, but I'm telling you, if you did it this way, y equals mx plus b, you should come to the right answer. But it's just that right now, my math is a bit wonky. But you can see clearly if you substitute here 0.5 and you substitute at 0.5, you get 5 for ligand. And the KD value we know is halfway point. So it's at the 50%. We know the KD value is 5. Substitute all of those, you get 0.5. That's why A is the answer. And you can only do it because it's a linear line. So keep that in mind. So therefore with B, if we take a look at question 2, okay. So with question 2, it says by comparison, molecule B possesses a KD value. So think about it. Remember what we said, 50% occupied. So therefore, the KD value for A is, if we drop it down, so the concentration required to occupy half the, I guess the receptor or the protein, you can see here, well, let's say it's about 40. So the KD for B is about 40 milligrams of mercury, whereas the KD for A is about 5, which we've established before, 5 milligrams of mercury. So you can see there that A has a smaller KD value. Now, what does that mean? Think about it logically. It means that you require less amount of oxygen to occupy half the protein. So that means if you require less to occupy half the protein, that means you have a greater affinity. If you need more of something to occupy something, it means it's not going to be, it's not going to have a, it's not going to have, if you need more to bind something, it's not going to have a good affinity. If you have a little amount occupying half, it means that it's very, very good at binding. So that's why if you take a look at this question here, the answer for 2 is B, because molecule B does have a higher, which take a look. So it does have a higher, so molecule B in this instance is hemoglobin, than myoglobin. It has a higher KD value, but that just means that it requires more protein to get it, to saturate the protein. Therefore, it has a lower affinity. So it's not likely to bind to it. Now, this is where I was saying earlier, it comes into play why it's important we know this. Because if I were to shift this graph to the right, you'd see that if you shift it to the right, let's say the graph comes over here now, its KD value is going to become, let's say, 90. And you can see straight away there, 90 is a much greater value than 40 and then 5. So that means it's going to have an even lower affinity for oxygen. And this is the sort of question you might see in the GAMSAT. You see this a lot, actually. These sorts of questions with the affinity, oxygen saturation, affinity of ligands to proteins. The reason why, if it shifts to the right, and when people always ask me, why if it shifts to the right, it has a lower affinity, is because of KD values. That means if it shifts to the right, the oxygen, the hemoglobin is more likely to give off the oxygen quicker. And in the instances where that's important is, let's say, for example, when you're exercising. When you're exercising, you need to offload as much oxygen as you can to your tissues. That's why the shift curves to the right. So the curve shifts to the right so that it gives it, it can offload more oxygen or more gas more readily. However, if you shift to the left, it's less likely because the protein, let's say you shift this to the left, you're less likely to offload the oxygen. And now in what context is this important? Let's say, for example, myoglobin. So myoglobin is found in, where are they? It's found in, I think, specifically, I'd say tissues. It's specialized for oxygen storage. So it's found in, I guess, yes, your tissues and muscles, specifically to store your oxygen in times of need. So that's why myoglobin is important. You might say, why does having a very low KD value, or why is it better to have a low dissociation constant? Think about it. Low dissociation means it's not likely to dissociate. The lower the value, less likely to dissociate. So, which means it has a higher affinity. And that's important because you don't want to, you want to store large quantities of oxygen, so in the tissue. So this is why myoglobin is very important. So keep that in mind whenever you see these sorts of diagrams. Keep in mind that the reason why they shift left and right is based on the principle of dissociation and association constant. If you can think of it that way, rather than just looking at the graph left and right shift, think of it through the idea of equilibrium and dissociation association constant. If you think of it through these two pathways, you'll understand it better, and it'll be, whenever you see this sort of graph in a GAMSAT, you're like, straight away, second nature. And just to go back here, keep in mind that linear line, we're looking at linear line, y equals mx plus b. Again, I completely bodged up that explanation, but the idea is that, because I put myself under pressure here, you can use the y equals mx plus b if you like, or you can just substitute values into here. Remember, 50% means 0.5, so 0.5 if you use the y equals mx plus b. So 50, so then you know that L at 50% is going to be 5. KD we know is 5. And then again 5. So 0.5 equals 5 over 10. So therefore that's correct. So you just have to substitute, plug and chug for these sorts of questions. Either use y equals mx plus b. So b equals 0, y equals mx. Find the gradient of this curve, and then you're going to work out the answer. I kind of bodged that up, but you can just do it in your spare time and prove me wrong. Post it in the comment section below because I completely bodged that up, but you get the point. Now, if we move over into the last two questions, it says here that the association constant, the good thing about it is it's the opposite, it's the inverse of the dissociation constant, so you can just flip the equations around. But just keep in mind, so you got here KD, KA would just be LP over, so it would just be flip this, and you can see here for equation 3, it shows you that. So it's just 1 over KD. So it's just 1 over this is KA. Now, keep in mind that the association constant, big K, big A subscript, don't get it confused with acid-base chemistry, which is the acid dissociation constant. Now, Ka. So you've probably noticed that they all look very as a dissociation constant. So have you noticed though that there's a link between the dissociation constant and acid dissociation? Can you see how they're very similar? Ligand protein over, so that's the I guess, say the substrates over the final product. Same thing here, substrates over final product. Can you see how they're very similar? So again, now when you're studying, you can put them together and you can piece all the puzzles together. It's not just you're studying equilibrium for dissociation constants, specifically for ligand binding and proteins. You can actually think about it as well of acid-base chemistry. So it's pretty cool. That's why I introduced this for you, to show you that they're pretty similar. Although, don't get confused here, K little a is acid dissociation constant, not the association constant. That could be tricky, which I've got here. So for deprotonation of acids, strong acids. So keep in mind, strong acids don't have an equilibrium symbol here. Strong acid would just be an arrow like that, whereas equilibrium has the half arrows because it can go back and forth. Whereas a strong acid completely ionizes. Keep that in mind. Whereas weaker acids, if you're in a GAMSAT, if you ever see this symbol, it means it's a weak acid. It means 100% that it doesn't completely ionize, it partially ionizes. That's a little trick you can see. If you ever see just a straight arrow like this, it means it's a strong acid. Hopefully, because if GAMSAT doesn't make that clear, then they made a mistake, ASA, whoever designed the question. So if we take a look at this question here, it says hopefully I won't bodge up this mathematics, but this one should be straightforward. It says here that the dissociation rate constant, so dissociation rate constant, remember, so that's K off. It's the rate constant for a newly discovered molecule in blood plasma is 5. So 5 per second at 20 degrees. So that's what that equals, so 5 per second. If the Ka of the reaction is 2 millimolar, so Ka here is 2 millimolar minus 1, the association rate constant, so what's this? Pretty much would be. So we're looking for this, and we've been giving this information. So if we know that Ka equals, so look, technically, I would always try to use the units when we're exchanging between I would always try to use the units if we're exchanging between the use the units if you're using the equations, but because here they give you the units, you don't have to, but I'll do that for you anyway. So what we're going to do here is let's just put it in. So Ka equals 1 over Kd, therefore Kd equals 1 over Ka. So it's going to be 1 over 2 millimolar. So therefore your Kd equals 1. So your Kd is going to equal 2 millimolar, half millimolar, so 0.5 millimolar. Therefore 0.5 millimolar equals, so 0.5 millimolar equals 5.5 seconds over K on. So if it's 0.5 millimolar equals 5 seconds over K on. So if we swap it, it's going to be K on equals 5 seconds divided by 0.5 millimolar. So therefore, your K on is going to equal 5 divided by 0.5 is 10. And then you can see how we kept the units, second minus 1, and this is going to come up. So that's going to be minus 1. So it's going to be millimolar minus 1. So just doing simple substitution, you can get your answer. Finally, it says here, you could get, again, just to go back here, you could get questions like this in your GAMSAT. You probably will, but just keep note, read the question carefully, because it kind of leads into question 4 here, which says the following equilibrium exists. It says here that we've got acetic acid plus water. That is acetic acid, isn't it? Just going to double check actually, because it's throwing me off now. Acetic acid chemistry. No, that's not acetic acid actually. Formic acid, sorry, it's formic acid. So we've got formic acid plus water. You can see it's a weak acid, ionizes to the proton and the, I guess the conjugate. So you can see it ionizes to the conjugate acid and base. So you've got the acid, in this instance, the base, and you've got the conjugate acid and conjugate base. So it says if the initial concentration of formic acid is 3.5 times greater than the final proton formation, so we can see here, if this, so we can see this down here is 3.5 times the initial, if the initial, sorry, is greater than the final, what is the percentage ionization? So over here, we know that initial is 3.5 of that, and original is going to be 1. So 1 over 3.5 is the same as, well, we know that 1 over 3 is 33%, and we know that 1 over 4 is 25%. Therefore, it's somewhere between 33 and 25, so it's about 30. So therefore, the answer is B. So keep that in mind whenever you see these sorts of questions. Read it carefully, but the reason why I included this here is just to show you that association, dissociation constants can be used, or dissociation specifically for acid-base chemistry, equilibrium, and protein and ligand binding chemistry, physiology, if you will. So if you have any questions, or if you've found that to be difficult to understand, you could always just send in your questions, post them in the comment section below, let us know, or contact us directly via social media or through here, and we can go through the answers together, I guess, personally. Now, you can follow us on social media. We will be releasing this recording very soon. You can access our other recordings on YouTube or our website. Just look up Institute of Medical Education and follow us on social media. Our next webinar is going to be on the 24th of November. Hopefully you guys can make it then. No exams then, hopefully. And we can discuss your again, I think the next one, yeah, so in another month, I'll send you all that information if you're on the mailing list, so don't worry. If you have any questions, let us know and we'll go through it. Thanks for your time. Good luck in your exams. Good luck to those who received offers, and we'll talk soon. Bye now.